I did want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, and pay respects to elders past and present. Given that this is an online talk, people are actually calling in from across Australia and New Zealand, maybe even other places. At least I know Dan is calling in from the States. So I just wanted to maybe encourage you to reflect on your local context. For me, I'm calling in from Canberra, and so I wanted to specifically recognize the Ngunnawal people as traditional custodians of the ACT and surrounding region, and other people and families who also have traditional connections to the lands that I'm calling from. So before we start, I wanted to also introduce our speaker and our panel. So today's session is going to start with a talk from Dan Berch. He's calling in from Florida, I believe. He is the founding chair of the Mathematical Cognition Learning Society and is a professor emeritus of educational psychology and applied developmental science at the University of Virginia. Then after his talk, we're going to move to a panel session of local researchers to reflect on Dan's talk and also targeted questions around how mathematical cognition and learning kind of fit in with research and educational policies and practices here in Australia and New Zealand. The panel consists of Rebecca Bull, who's a professor of numeracy at Macquarie University, Jacob Paul, who's a research fellow in psychological sciences at the University of Melbourne, and Tanya Evans, who's a senior lecturer in mathematics education at the University of Auckland. I hope that you notice that these three panel members are coming from very different backgrounds, who have a shared interest in mathematical cognition and learning, and also from very different locations. So those were purposely picked to try and help represent different fields and different perspectives, all coming together for these same outcomes. I was meant to moderate this session, but unfortunately, I have been pulled away into a university level meeting that I'm required to attend. And subsequently, Tom Lowry, who's a centenary professor of mathematics education at the University of Canberra, has agreed to moderate. So thank you, Tom. And he is, you might notice his name tag is Tracy Logan. It's because Tracy is there with him as well. Thank you, Tracy. I have Ross on the call, who's going to help all the technical issues or questions that you might have. So as someone mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. If it's something for Ross, he can deal with it. But if not, he can help curate that for Tom a little later for the question and answer section that we might be able to address some of those questions. So please feel free to post your questions or ask them later on. So thank you everybody who's helping out and speaking today. Thank you also for signing up for this session. And so I'm so excited for this session, but beyond just this talk, this individual session, we do have this broader aim to build, support, and make visible a network of mathematical cognition and learning research here in Australia and New Zealand, and trying to think about, who are we as a group and how can we move us forward? And so by signing up, by attending, has really done a lot even in that effort. And so thank you for joining us. And with that in mind, with that thinking about us as a field, I had one more thing I wanted to flag, which is that there's a Mathematical Cognition and Learning Society conference that gets hosted every year. And in 2025, it is being hosted in Hong Kong with in June. Now the dates are escaping me, early June. And now we can send out an advertisement much closer too. But the point here is that as a society, they're purposely trying to host this conference on our side of the world to reach researchers here. And so I just wanted to make you guys aware of that. Thank you, Danielle, June 9th to 11th in 2025 in Hong Kong. So please do look out for that. And after the talk, I promise not to send a million emails to people, but I will send at least one to thank you for coming and to flag a poll for future talks and sessions. What are we interested in doing? What kinds of talks would people want to attend? And so that'll be the one email I send you after this talk to thank you for coming and see, what you want from us. So with that said, I want to pass over to Dan to start his portion and give a talk around mathematical cognition and learning. So thank you, Dan. Thank you for coming. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Okay. Let me get the setup. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Ilyse, and everyone else. Hello out there. And Ilyse, thank you also for the excellent work you've been doing on the governing board for the society. Appreciate that very much. Well, as you can see, the title of my talk is Mathematical Cognition and Learning, the Role of the MCLS in Promoting and Advancing the Field. In this talk, I will briefly describe the field of mathematical cognition and learning, try to convey the importance of the field both for science and society, point out some benefits of establishing a scientific association, recount the events that inspired the founding of the MCLS, and briefly articulate the mission and vision of this organization. You might ask, if you're trying to describe this field, what does it really encompass? And some of the questions you could ask is, what are the mental processes that are considered essential for learning math? What kinds of math skills have been studied? What relevant disciplinary specialties are involved? What types of other factors contribute to mathematical learning? What about the theoretical models that are used, and have they been tested? And what educational benefits can this kind of research lead to? What I'm going to try to do is, very briefly, present a 30,000-foot view of the field of mathematical cognition and learning. I will try to answer these questions in a way that, well, let me just suggest that since I'm speaking to people from New Zealand and Australia, that it'd probably be better if I said I was going to give a 9,144 meter view, but I think it loses something in translation. In any event, mathematical cognition and learning is really an interdisciplinary field concerned with investigating the nature, phylogenetic origins, and ontogenetic development of mental representations, mental information processing operations, and problem-solving strategies that support the acquisition of quantitative, numerical, and arithmetic skills, pre-algebraic and elementary algebraic concepts and procedures, along with higher order math competencies. Now, by making use of an exceptionally diverse range of research methods and measures, a rapidly growing number of studies are yielding valuable empirical findings that are contributing to our understanding of both the typical and atypical development of mathematical abilities. This rich corpus of evidence really consists of, again, a wide range of different kinds of contributions that include, but are not limited to, genetic influences and neural mechanisms, domain general cognitive abilities such as working memory, inhibition, and attention shifting, linguistic variations and cultural contexts, reading and spatial skills, home math environments, parental math attitudes and skills, family socioeconomic status, and math anxiety, coupled with novel theoretical insights that are emanating from embodied cognition accounts and evolutionary perspectives, among others, and from the application of computational modeling. This knowledge is in turn informing the design of educational practices and more appropriately targeted instructional interventions. I'm out of breath, but hence my brief overview. So Ilyse posed a number of these questions for me to try to answer. Why is this field important, both for science and society? Well, the field can make contributions to cognitive science that go beyond the realm of mathematics. And I have some examples, I think, that I'd read recently from Doctors Camilla Gilmore and her colleagues Silke Goebel and Matthew Inglis, where they convincingly point out, and I'm paraphrasing here, that since making mathematical judgments entails the integration of ancient evolutionary systems for representing quantitative information with symbolic representational systems, the study of math cognition can provide, as they put it, a window into how our cognitive systems engage with multiple sources of information, thus affording an ideal test case for exploring broader issues concerning the nature of cognitive processing. Well, what about the importance for society? Well, I think we can be of value to society downstream by supplying a robust evidence base for ameliorating the difficulties that many students experience acquiring foundational math skills in primary school. And these will be necessary for succeeding as adults in modern society. Of course, if they aren't remedied, the lack of such skills can result in reduced employment opportunities, lower income levels, and increased health risks. And there are, as some of you know, a number of birth cohort and other longitudinal studies that show that evidence. And indeed, in some of those cases, those difficulties arise above and beyond or independently of problems with with literacy, pardon me. So Gilmore and her colleagues have also pointed out some of these issues in discussing some of the findings from the UK, specifically from the Skills for Literacy survey by the OECD, or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And I believe, somebody may be able to correct me, but some of the last data coming from 2013 has estimated that 24% of adults in the UK have numeracy levels below that needed to function in everyday life, like understanding food pricing or paying household bills. Well, note that also on this slide, I indicated that, quotes, many students struggle with math. Well, how many? Well, I'm most familiar with, in the US, for example, one of the best indicators of math achievement is the so-called National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the NAEP, more commonly referred to in the States as the nation's report card. Now, there are 3 levels of performance. They're somewhat different than your test, I think the NAPLAN, I believe it's called, for proficiency levels. But on the NAEP, the highest level is called advanced, then proficient, with the lowest one labeled as basic. On the NAEP test administered in 2022, 40%, I repeat, 40% of all students scored below the basic level in 8th grade math. Now, of course, this is still around the time toward the last year of the pandemic. In fact, it brought some of these scores back to the 2005 level, at least in part due to that. But the basic level, and again, they're below the basic level, that 40%, the basic level denotes partial mastery of the knowledge and skills that are fundamental for proficient work at a given grade level. So my point here is that evidence resulting from studies of cognitive processing and the role of factors that influence the acquisition of math skills can not only contribute to our understanding of the development of math learning difficulties and disabilities, but can also inform the design of more effective instructional interventions. Speaking of which, I think one of my favorite statements concerning the implications of cognitive science research for mathematics education comes from a book chapter by Bob Siegler, who's now at Columbia University. This was from a little over 20 years ago, but I think it still holds up. Neither controlled scientific experimentation nor theoretical analyses automatically translate into prescriptions for classroom instruction. They can provide useful frameworks for thinking about teaching and learning, can indicate sources of difficulty that children encounter in learning particular skills and concepts, and can demonstrate potentially effective instructional procedures. Well, what about the benefits of establishing a scientific society, since we want to move into what the MCLS can do? But in general, through newsletters, listservs, conferences, etc., scientific societies can foster the advancement of the field by serving as a unifying hub that provides its members with a variety of opportunities for sharing cutting-edge findings, novel methods, and theoretical advances, opportunities for networking with scientists, and especially for those from institutions in remote geographic regions. There are opportunities to form new collaborations, providing a service to one's field, developing useful management and leadership skills. And at these meetings, we can welcome the involvement of the next generation of researchers and have also with the meeting experience relating to mentoring, professional development, and peer recognition. Well, Ilyse asked me to sort of provide some information about what events gave rise to the founding of the MCLS. Initially, I was awarded a math year, a 5-annual math year conference grant from the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. Took all my breath to say that, which is one of the institutes at the US National Institutes of Health. I was the primary investigator, and my co-investigator was Dave Geary from the University of Missouri. So we were funded to plan, organize, and manage this 5-year series of conferences. The scientific and program officers, Dr. Kathy Mann-Kepke and Dr. Peggy McCardle, suggested to me that I try to found or form a society in math learning. They also recommended that I might want to consider modeling it after the Society for the Scientific Study of Reading, given that the theme or focus of their association is also a subject matter area. Well, as the grant period progressed, I started thinking more seriously about trying to do this. And around that same time, I learned that several European researchers were considering establishing their own society. And this included Drs. Wim Fias, Roy Cohen-Kadash, and an Israeli researcher, who many of you may know, Dr. Avishai Hennick. Well, they heard I was trying to do the same thing in the US, and so they contacted me and included in this conversation Dr. John Taus, who at the time was preparing to become the first editor-in-chief of the Journal of Numerical Cognition, which was soon to be launched. So we had some discussions that led to the decision to found a single international organization. And we agreed that I would be the one to oversee that formation of what subsequently became the MCLS. And even though we're talking about me, there are a slew of people who had been serving on my board for the conference series who worked with me initially and became the first governing board, a part of that governing board. For your sake and mine, I'll skip over describing the multiple challenges I faced trying to learn how to accomplish the founding of a nonprofit scientific society. Let me just say that I lost about 10 pounds, which I don't have that much to lose in the process. The funding, it's important to recognize initially for launching the society, came from international resources, and respectively from Ghent University. Fias is one of his grants, Jesus College, at Oxford University from Roy's, one of his grants, and from Ben Gurion University of the Negative from Avishai Hennick, and also some funding from my own conference grant program and from the income from some of the conference series. The MCLS was incorporated in Washington, D.C. in April of 2015. We soon began to expand the governing board, which also included, and I think he's on the call here, Bob Reeve from the University of Melbourne. And then finally, the JNC became the official journal of the MCLS in 2016. What does the MCLS hope to achieve and by what means? The initial answers to these questions can be found in the forthcoming mission and vision statements of the strategic plan, which we haven't posted yet, so I'm not putting it out here, but I wanted to mention this plan also includes a list of core values, and I will tell you those briefly, along with an overview of a much more detailed implementation plan that is currently in the works. We don't want the plan to just sit on the shelf, but it's like, okay, we have these values, we have this mission and vision, what are we going to do about it? What steps are we going to take? And how can we be inclusive about all of those things? So what I want to do is to read to you the Society's mission and vision. One is a little briefer than the other, to give you a sense of what we're all about. The Society's mission is to advance the interdisciplinary scientific investigation of mathematical cognition and learning across countries, cultures, and communities, to disseminate the resultant knowledge and to promote its application globally for improving the learning of mathematics and enriching its development. The vision is a little more detailed. The MCLS will become the leading international society that will be promoting interdisciplinary research, communication about, and open science practices in the study of mathematics, learning, and cognition. We will build capacity in the field by expanding the global representation of researchers working in this area, strengthening networking opportunities, and fostering collaborations in ways that benefit all involved. We will attract, engage, and support the next generation of scientists investigating the nature and origins of mathematics learning. We will also ensure that they have continuing access to training and cutting-edge research methods, mentorship, and professional development. We will cultivate equity and inclusion and increase diversity in all its forms. And finally, the MCLS will undertake outreach activities internationally to inform public policy and practice. These are the core values I mentioned, and very briefly, what they stand for is, initially, we encourage interdisciplinary research on mathematical cognition and learning, drawing on the various disciplines constituting the cognitive, neural, developmental, and education sciences. We strongly endorse diversity in all its forms, including but not limited to perspectives, approaches, representation, along with equity, inclusivity, access, and justice. Now, we cherish the international vibrancy of our society and recognize the advantages to our membership in the field of having global input to and representation across all levels of this organization. Delayering, as we phrase it, refers to the fact that society, easy to pronounce, ardently supports the belief that regardless of professional status or disciplinary specialty, everyone deserves equal access to the benefits of membership in this organization. We encourage open interactions among all members. And I would say briefly that some of those things, I don't just give myself credit, largely our speakers at the conference series that led up to the MCLS, in part because we were smaller, we had constant interactions between senior investigators and graduate students. It wasn't just a special lunch or something. And we carried that through to the conferences, and we think that's critical for the society. We also enthusiastically sanction open science practices, including the sharing of study designs, research protocols, data, and pre-registration. And last of all, mentoring. We deeply value the role of mentoring as a powerful tool for transforming the society, its members, and ultimately research on mathematical cognition and learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Fascinating. And it's been a long time since I actually reflected on how a society gets started. And I can imagine the 10 pound, you probably did well only losing that much, I suspect, in the way that was framed. The last conference I went to was a really large one, and it was the International Congress of Mathematics Education. And there was about 3,500 people there, and it was the first time for quite a while, actually, that a lot of people were talking about one thing. And the one thing that was being talked about was this sort of term evidence-based learning. And it's and you've mentioned it in your talk, and like many things in the learning sciences and indeed education, there's some sort of cyclic thing where things come back to where they once were. But it seems like this has actually changed now. The way that it's being talked about and described seems to be many things to many people, and potentially it can be looked upon as being quite dangerous as a term, actually, in my view anyway. So I was just wondering how you feel that the society can sort of connect to that, really important component, I guess, of contributing to giving proper evidence base to the work that's being done. And you mentioned Siegler as a way of sort of framing that and keeping us all settled at times, as that we can't expect too much. But I was hoping you might be able to react to that.
Well, one of the things I would say is, and I agree with you entirely the way you framed it in terms of the range of things people refer to when they talk about evidence-based. But one of the things is that I preferred that over a term that other people still use, which is research-based, because you can have something that's research-based, of course, but you don't have the evidence to support it. And then you have the issue of course, what evidence from where? It's like watching one of those ads on TV that, studies have shown that this medication works or something. What studies, where were they published, and all of that. I think one of the things that can happen briefly, and then hopefully you hear from the rest from the panel, is that eventually, although we aren't so much a practice organization, but we might get to the point where we could put out certain policy briefs or some of the kinds of things that people like Siegler and many others, and some who are a part of the society have put out, summarizing various kinds of evidence-based practice statements in the US for the Institute of Education Sciences. And they cite the evidence that led to 5 or 6 suggestions, if not prescriptions. But I think it's several of those steps with some other kinds of things that may need to go on as well for that to become effective.
I just want to sort of push you a little bit on that, if I may. So in Australia, we have a group that's sort of been set up to sort of take carriage of the collective of what evidence looks like. And I don't think it's as sophisticated as what it is in the US. Well, it's certainly not as mature anyway, in that sense. But do you feel that you can speak as a society, as a single voice, in terms of being able to sort of collate sort of statements and work that could be done, or is it too much sort of independence in people, not wanting to sort of sign up to sort of common sort of core values?
Well, that's a great point, and I think yes, especially since we're trying to be so diverse in terms of the representation. I hope that'll even grow and expand, and it it may not be something that we'd be able to accomplish, and we haven't really pushed into that realm of policy-related statements. But what you say is a critical point, and something that would have to be part and parcel of our discussions. Again, unlike some organizations who that I'm not trying to say anything negative about them, but I mean they have more of a similar view and foundational perspectives, as well as sort of an underlying epistemological perspective on what their work is all about. So I don't know if it'll be possible, but
yeah.
We'll try to do our part. And it may not be something that the society as a whole does that, but here are some of our members are putting out their perspectives, and it may or may not be something that the entire organization buys into.
Yeah, thank you. I might ask Rebecca to react to that now, if I may. So I guess sort of following on from that sort of last sort of interaction, Rebecca, given now that you're in Australia and you've seen the lie of the land for a little while, how do you feel that society can begin to contribute and I guess sort of try and take on some of these really core ideas that people are grappling with at present?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I guess just to be completely transparent, I'm someone who's come from a background as a kind of hardcore cognitive psychologist through to now being in a school of education. So I've seen math cognition research kind of from both sides. I guess just one thing to point out right now, particularly in Australia, is I think we're actually at a really important kind of time to be able to emphasize the kind of research that's going on in math cognition and how it can feed in to teacher education and classroom practice. Because, last year we had the Teacher Education and Experience report come out, kind of emphasizing evidence-based practice. Dan, you'll be excited here, not research-based, evidence-based practice. Science of learning, interpret that as you will. People interpret it in different ways, but definitely a push for thinking about how basic science research can kind of influence what happens in the classroom. And that includes a focus on the brain and learning. And I think I can speak to Macquarie University at least. We are seeing a lot more of that work coming in at the very early levels of the undergraduate teacher education programs. So I think it's starting to be incorporated more in initial teacher education. And so hopefully it will start filtering down as we go along. But I think that alone, that TEAT report really opens up the door for us to start really trying to ingrain that kind of evidence-based mass cognition research within practice. We've also heard of the last few weeks about concerns about NAPLAN performance again. And obviously, we all have different thoughts about what NAPLAN is actually measuring, but there's no doubt that it's there and it needs to be addressed. And, you know, talk about how we can ensure that before they get to grade 3, we've started to recognize those students who are not on track to be meeting basic proficiency standards. So again, I think we're going to see more and more of this kind of need for the kind of research that we do to feed into not only initial teacher education programs and ongoing professional development, but also work that's needed to kind of do this work of identifying students who are not meeting proficiency standards. So I think there's huge potential for us to ingrain what we're doing in that work. I think at the same time, we need to be careful how we position ourselves, particularly when we are working with educators who are already massively burdened, you know, sometimes feel that they're being told to completely change what they're doing in terms of their own practice. And so just, you know, from my own experience of particularly working with in-service teachers who are taking postgraduate courses in effective instruction in math, I think we need to recognize that actually, potentially they are already doing some of the things that we talk about as being evidence-based practice, even if they don't necessarily know that they're doing it. It's just that we use slightly different terminology to talk about some of these things. And so I think we need to make sure that we go in with a very kind of openness to kind of discussing the different ideas and really coming to an agreement on you know, where we have some level of acknowledgement that we're all talking about the same thing and that we're all here to work together. We're not there to kind of tell them, well, this is what, you know, the science of learning says you should do. This is what our evidence says you should do. But to also recognize that probably they are doing a lot of that work already and that we can learn a lot from them about how it's used in the classroom. So I really think we're in a really good position to take this into classrooms, but I think we also need to be very aware that this is a bi-directional collaboration that we will have with teachers and educators as we move forward, and we need to be very conscious of that.
Thank you. You mentioned that that now you're in a education faculty, and I noticed that Katie Macker, who's the president of MERGA, is actually online here at the moment. So it might noticed, Katie, I might get back to you in a minute and just sort of revolve, because I think as a collective we've got some added force if we're getting you know, really important scientific principles going together. And so I think some of that discussion might be really critical too. So I guess that sort of follows on for you, Tanya, if I may, about thinking about, you know, the extent to which at present, at least from Australia and New Zealand, and I suppose that a collective term would still be fair, Australasia, there's a bit of an underrepresentative movement in the organisation at present. And I guess I wanted to react to that firstly and see if you could sort of provide some insights as to why or how we might be able to progress forward.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, it is true that Australasian researchers are underrepresented in the society at present, and that is for many reasons, but I would like to mention 3 key reasons that stand out for me. So the first is the most obvious, is the geographical distance and time zones. So, for example, if we look at the locations of all the previous MCLS conferences, so the first one was held at Oxford in 2018, the next one was in Ottawa in Canada, then there were 2 online, and then in Belgium, then back to the UK, to the University of Loughborough, and this year it was in Washington, DC. So all of them are in Europe or North America. and which is totally understandable because MCLS is a global organization, and it was set up as a global organization, and it would naturally for this organization to host conferences in the major hubs of activity. But this, of course, can make it extremely challenging for researchers in our region to participate fully. And this is not only because of the long distance travel required and the associated costs, but also it limits our ability to take part in online conferences and events as well, because quite often they're scheduled in the middle of the night for us. So that is a big hurdle. The second reason is limited awareness of the MCLS within the Australasian academic community. I think the society might not have been as actively promoted here as it was done in the Northern Hemisphere. And many researchers here may simply not be aware of what MCLS is and what it can offer. And this is definitely true for New Zealand. In New Zealand, chances are people have never heard about MCLS. And so hence this event is very much relevant. And the third reason that I want to mention is regional research focus. Mathematics education research here in Australia, in New Zealand, might have different priorities for some valid historical reasons. So some researchers might gravitate towards other organizations that are more aligned with their specific research interests. And so overall, to increase representation within the society, the most obvious first step would be to establish a local Australasian chapter of the society so that we could offer more region-friendly online events and even host a conference down under here once in a while. Why not? Also, we need to explore the potential synergies with the existing local organizations, such as MERGA. For those who do not know, MERGA stands for the Mathematics Education Research Group of Australasia, which is a vibrant, well-organized and flourishing community that has been around for almost 50 years. And I'm a proud member of this community, and I enjoy being part of MERGA. So perhaps it would be useful to explore opportunities for some sort of formal affiliation between MCLS and MERGA. Would it make sense to set up a special interest group so that Australasian MCLS researchers can meet in person every year, close to home, at the MERGA annual conferences? Does it make sense? And so I think this could make a big difference in terms of targeted outreach and also in terms of establishing new collaborations with MERGA researchers. And this is all I wanted to say, and I'm sure there will be other suggestions from the audience later in the session.
Thank you, Tanya. And I guess whenever I'm online at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., I'm always thinking about you folk in New Zealand who are online at midnight or 1 a.m. So I do appreciate that the challenge of this, and I think you're absolutely right about this idea of a chapter connectivity, because I think there has to be a sort of a regional impetus. Otherwise, it's just too hard to hang on. You know, you can do it for a little while, but it just gets too draining. So I guess that leads into the next sort of series or question is for you, Jacob. And I guess it's always like, you know, what's in it for the society from the perspective of Australia and New Zealand, or or Australasia. So in other words, okay, what can we add value to the organisation where they would really want to have some I guess different connectivity and possibly open up to us, so that I guess those novel contributions that you see that we can actually provide.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think Tanya's very clearly articulated the disadvantages, I guess, of being where we are, and I think on the flip side, the advantage is, I guess, for society, I like Dan's the wording of the mission statement of this global representation. So being able to obviously assist in that, but countries, cultures, societies. I think we are uniquely positioned in the sense that Australia, just take Australia and New Zealand, even from Australiana, but just Australia and New Zealand, quite similar societies, but have very different, potentially in parts, instructional practices. Even within Australia, national curriculum, but state-based differences here and there. So I feel like we are a quite an interesting test bed for testing out a few of these ideas, where you've got a lot of similarities, but also quite a lot of differences. So thinking just experimentally and in terms of evidence base, testing out a few of those ideas, which is quite a unique perspective. And I guess the other side of that is, and some of this is informed by some work that, at least in the Australian context, I know that Bob Reeve, but also with Brian Butterworth, going back a few years now, in engaging with local First Nations knowledge, which I guess in the Australian context is quite unique, as it is in the New Zealand context. And so being able to learn and I guess involve in co-design some useful both ways of teaching and instruction, but also ways of thinking and the cognition that's involved there. So celebrating some of those similarities and differences. I think, again, we're sort of uniquely positioned in the world to be able to contribute to that. And so I think those things would keep us together as a chapter or as a society on the other side of the world. So you're right, it doesn't mean that we're having to always be thinking about our place in relation to the bigger society. It's got its own steam to keep going. And I think that was sort of the impetus, I guess, for some of these conversations that got started between, I guess it was myself and Ilyse and Rebecca and Tanya, after going to a previous MCLS conference and realizing we've flown to the other side of the world to have these conversations, sitting in a tea room, in Loughborough, when it's just as much easier to have these conversations both in our time zone, but also interacting with this much larger set of connections that exist already, and tapping into some of those connections without having to reinvent the wheel, but to be, I guess, another voice in contributing to this evidence space. And I guess my background being psychology, also a bit of neuroscience, I think being very, very clear again that this point of Bob Siegler's, that the idea isn't to then come in and put a cap on a kid or every kid in the classroom, and that isn't sort of the gap we're trying to narrow. It is sort of understanding that there are valuable contributions from each of these domains, and it's a matter of making those connections, and at least allowing for this this connection to occur. So by formalizing, I think, this connection, it will build it and they will come sort of idea, rather than sort of dictating as well, I think, how I guess our own unique experiences should drive that. So I'm glad to see that we've got a group of people here today, but also a mailing list that will spring from this to keep us all connected.
Yeah, and that notion of build and they will come is really important, because in a sense, once the people from North America and the good folk from Europe start coming to your chapter, you've made it, right?
Indeed.
because instead of having to just sort of jump on the plane all the time, having be able to host people, and I think that's where there's a much better connectivity and to have that flourish. Believe it or not, we're on time, which is almost hard to believe, especially if I'm involved in anything. So I just wanted to very briefly, if anyone of the panel wanted to sort of come in and add value to any of the separate comments that I've posed to each of the panel members, and then otherwise then we'll open it up to some discussion from the audience. Okay, that silence is good. Everyone's probably thinking we're staying on time. Don't blow it now, Tom. So that's now, Ross, you have to help me out here now. If there's any questions that have been posed online, or if anyone who's online would like to sort of comment or raise a question or to the panel or make a comment themselves.
Can I ask a question of the audience, Tom?
You may.
And that's, I guess, I mean, like you said, them just showing up suggest that this is something that they're interested in knowing more about in terms of how we take this potential grouping further. I guess I'd just like to get a sense of, you know, I can see how having a group like this and being seen as a critical mass could be important if we're advocating for certain things in the educational domain, and also if we're responding to new government policy initiatives. You know, if we can really sign off as a kind of critical mass, that sometimes looks stronger than signing off as individuals. So yes, I guess I'd just like to really get a sense of, you know, if trying to really put together an Australian New Zealand chapter of the MCLS is something that people really would see a lot of value in. Obviously, Tanya's already raised that there are some existing groups already, like MERGA. So perhaps people think that actually it's not necessary. I've already got these existing groups. So yeah, I guess I'd just be interested to hear what people's opinions are, because that's really why we started this discussion, is to try and raise the profile, get together this group of researchers who can come together and support one another, in the way that MCLS has always tried to do, in terms of a non-structural, non-hierarchical group of people who can support each other. So yeah, I'd just like to kind of open that up for people's thoughts.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. I might comment first on that. And first of all, I wanted to thank Chelsea Cutting for inviting me to come to this, actually inviting the MERGA community to come to this, because I think for us, it's quite an important discussion to have. And I think it would be a very important collaboration for us to be, or affiliation for us to be thinking more about. There's a real danger at the moment of people dichotomizing, education and mathematical cognition. And I can see that within our memberships, as we kind of are trying to grapple with some of the things the governments are putting forward, that I'm not sure that either of our groups necessarily agree with. But I don't know, because I can't speak for your group, but I know within the MERGA community, at least, I'm sure not everyone is on the same, page as that, but I think a good number of them are really quite concerned about things that are happening. And I do see oftentimes a real finger pointing, I guess, exercise that's not helping either of us. I love the fact, Rebecca, that you said we have, education and cognitive psychology and, all these fields have so much to learn from each other. And if we, I think, work together, I think we can provide a richer experience for children in learning mathematics that doesn't just think of maths as only doing, basic arithmetic and such, which often these tests focus on, but see mathematics as a really rich experience that includes, both those kinds of skill work and the abstract elements of mathematics that are so powerful, as well as the opportunity to wrestle with problems that are ambiguous and, that need mathematical evidence, but take a little bit more understanding and a different kind of understanding of mathematics, I guess, to be able to grapple with. So I'm really, was really pleased to hear you speaking, and love the fact that that Tanya, your point about, having that lens in MCLS that's well known in Australasia a bit more, and that we can try to maybe work together as communities.
Thank you, Kat. Catherine, you've got your hand up.
Thank you so much. And what a great group. So I'm not a researcher, I'm an educational and developmental psychologist. So it's really lovely seeing the mix of different abilities here. And I guess where my perspective is coming from, and looking at the training of ed and dev psychs working in schools and their area of specialty. And one of the things, the math and dyscalculia, number sense, it's not well taught. That was terrible English, so maybe I've got a learning difficulty. But I guess that's where, that's where my passion is to help empower psychologists to be better in that, the language, the communication of mathematics. So this is something that I would love to collaborate more with you know, for teaching psychologists and getting their understanding from that neurocognitive approach, but how do we translate it to our educator in the classroom without being patronizing? And once again, Tracy, you said that thing, that the term evidence-based and how that's become watered down when someone says, oh, it's evidence, but they, you know, teaching teachers what does evidence-based look like? What does research look like? So it's such a multi-system thing. But like I said, this is where having a grouping like this, how can my area of expertise complement and help, and that we can strengthen each other.
Thank you very much. It's the fact that you're here is a really good sign, and I must say, because that's what we learn from one another, as Katie said, through that diversity. And so, from that perspective, I think, also to sort of Katie's point, that the overlap is such that it's productive overlap and not splitting sort of organisations apart. That's certainly not what anyone would like to do. And it might well be that from a Merger perspective, we might actually get a few more people wanting to engage with us as well, and vice versa. And I think that can only be helpful and supportive. Any other hands raised?
Tom, can you mention what the theme is of the next? Do you remember what it is for the next Merger conference? Because I think, or Tracy, you'll remember actually, Tracy, better.
So for anyone who's interested, Merger is being held in Canberra next year, the Sunday the 6th of July through to Thursday the 10th. And we've gone with a very, I guess, a little bit cognitive focus. We've called it Unlocking Minds. So we're looking at cognition, but also then unlocking minds in terms of society as well. How do we influence, and how do we people to just, you know, have a bit more open-mindedness about how we go about our work and that. So there's a couple of layers there, but definitely, I guess, coming from the CERC group at Canberra, that the theme was a bit more cognition based than sort of, I guess that's sociological side of things, but of course Merger is open to and very welcoming to all. So if that's something you would love to come to after Hong Kong, please drop over to Canberra.
Yeah, just to add that, it's reassuring that you're not on late June, I must say. That helps a lot. and I think that there'd be I would say that Merger people will go to Hong Kong, and which I think is a good sign. But just to give you some context too, for Merger, typically it starts on the Sunday, and the actual a keynote is on about 4 p.m. on a Sunday normally. But that leaves the entire sort of Sunday as a day where the Merger executive have to go off and they meet. So Katie would be running an executives meeting basically all day. We have an early career and a newcomer component to that as well. But to Tanya's point, it could fit really nicely with a chapter of your society on that day, or even on the Saturday before, where and I'm very confident that a lot of people that currently are in Merger would go to that day. You know, so I think that's something to think about from a structural perspective. There's a structure in place there where it's already set up where it would sort of add value in the sense that it wouldn't disrupt one, but it would blend in beautifully. And so that's something that you could possibly consider too. And I'm sure we're lucky Katie's here because and the fact that Ilyse and Tracy work together could mean that if we can't get something together next year, we might never be able to be honest, because they're in offices pretty close to one another. So I think that would sort of help with Dan's view of that sort of collective nature, particularly from those societal components. And I think that there's so much to add about the society components of those two groups alone, which would be really beneficial. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I don't know if there's anyone else that would like to make a comment, or if we let you have last say, Dan. Otherwise, as the founder and of the organisation, of course.
Well, yeah. One thing I'd say is I know I was just looking for some overview from the IMBIS, International Mind, Brain, and Education Society. And even though their focus is on educational neuroscience, they grapple a lot with these issues, directly connecting to educators, to things like neuromyths and what do teachers need to know, if anything, about the brain. And so there have been a number of very excellent articles that they put out in their Mind, Brain, and Education journal and other places. That's another, you know, so even if it's primarily neuroscience, but you know, some of it is the more cognitive bases, even without the neuroscience. It's a chance to look at some other ideas and steps that people have taken that I think are very interesting as ways of coming together with educators and trying to explore those relations.
It's a really good point. And at least from my sort of observations and experience in Australia, if several societies can come together with a common voice, government's more likely to listen. And so in Australia, at times we've really struggled to get a common voice across a range of organizations and groups. And this might be a really good, to your point, Dan, this might be a really good place to begin. Well, it's very exciting. We're right on time. And I guess I'd like to sort of thank Ilyse for organising this, and I'd like to thank Dan and the panel members for a really engaging and thought-provoking session for us. And hopefully this is just the beginning of something new for Australia and New Zealand, and possibly Australasia more broadly. So take care, have a good day. Thank you very much for engaging with us, and hope to see you all soon. Yeah, and Ilyse will be firing off an email as we speak, I suspect. So take care, everybody.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Great reading.
Bye.
Good job.